There we go.
Okay, so Maslow studied human behavior, studied the Blackfoot tribe, kind of pulled all of his knowledge together to create his theory on motivation. And he also really believed that you can't just study people who are in suffering. You need to study people who are thriving, who are kicking ass, who are changing the world. You need to know the difference in the characteristics and what are the circumstances that provide those people to thrive, because it's not necessarily an individual thing. It could be the environment that they were in, the culture they were brought up in, the system that they reside in is functioning at a higher level. Why are certain societies suffering? And why are the same exact genetics in a different society not suffering? Why are they thriving? What's the difference? And what he found is this, that societies that function in a higher place, that are not having to secure their primal needs, tend to be able to explore. They tend to be more creative. They have arts, education. They function at a much higher level. It's hard to learn information and learn things when you're just trying to keep your shit together. That's not a personal failure. That's how the brain is supposed to work. You're not supposed to be able to focus on your fitness if you can't afford food. Makes no sense, right? To focus on, well, if I look good, maybe that'll improve my access to food, which can happen, right? In history, if you were more attractive in any way, doesn't have to be physical, to your society, to your community, could that translate to being secure and from being ousted, shunned, kicked out? Yes. Clearly, it's evolved to be that way today. So, quickly, physiological needs. Who remembers what those are? Clothing, water. Yes, clothing might be in this one. Environment, because you don't have to have clothes. So this is a big differentiator. I'm glad you brought that up. A big differentiator between physiological need and safety or environmental need is that physiological needs are biologically necessary, right? So our clothing or clothes, biologically necessary. No, but certainly they are really important. They're not up here, right? Up here. They're in this big part of the pyramid, and it is made into a pyramid because the foundation means this is how important this is, right? This is how think of this as how obsessive you will become if you don't have it. How much space in the brain will be focused on food if you don't have access to it? This is specifically very important for anybody struggling with an eating disorder. You're residing in primitive brain because food isn't safe, right? I don't know how many of you have been dieting, but food is not safe. You have to micromanage the packaging. What's in the food? That's a sign that you're living in extreme fight or flight, specific to this foundational hierarchy of need. And you're not special at all, because everybody under those circumstances behaves identically. That's why they have it something you can diagnose, because it's so repeatable, especially with food issues, that they can create a diagnosable, oh, they're meeting all of these same exact specific thoughts and behaviors. Everybody functions this way. When food is scarce, going away, you can't get more, perceived as dangerous, you're going to become obsessive. Okay, we have an entire industry that is obsessed with food, as if we're all going to die because it's toxic. Okay, so food, water cleanliness, Last year or a year ago, there was just go to the crisis in, I think, Michigan, where the food is toxic or the water is toxic, how that might impact your thoughts in a day. Making sure you have enough water, making sure you can boil whatever water. Do you have water for cleanliness? Do you have water for cooking? Think about that. It's kind of a big deal. We kind of don't have those issues, generally speaking, because how many of you have had water scarcity? Honestly, anybody here experience water scarcity or danger? So it's kind of hard to know, wow, humans become obsessed with water if it's scarce. It's really a big deal. So we don't necessarily have that experience because of how privileged we are in our high society. So yeah, sleep is another big one. We know that if you do not get adequate sleep, it impacts your immune system. It impacts your psychological well-being, how your brain functions, your memory, your ability to learn. It impacts your endocrine system, or the system that promotes fuel and or no releasing of fuel. Sleep is a massive part of how sick you get. If you can regenerate and recover. So let's just say you are active. Let's say your job requires that you are working laboriously. If you're not getting adequate sleep, you're prone to damage your joints because they don't recover and regenerate without REM sleep, right? So this physiological need, he proposed that if these are threatened, you will become obsessed. Your conscious mind will start to fixate on those things and fixate specifically on making sure they are secure. Okay, so safety. Anybody want to make a guess on what this includes?
Shelter or home.
Yep.
And transportation, healthcare, tools.
Let's say the last word again.
Tools. Equipment or protection.
Tools, thank you. So home, shelter, healthcare, transportation, clothing, right? The way you clothe, being, so clothing would be protection from the elements. How many of you have floated down the Boise River this summer? I actually didn't. Okay, how many of you have floated down any river this summer? Okay, how many of you have, okay, my point being, how to go if you didn't have shoes in the water? No good, right? How many of you have walked into a river and it been really uncomfortable? Okay, that would be an environmental thing, right? Let's think about even just camping. How many of you camped this summer? Oh, camping. You're roughing it, right? Did you notice that it was harder to sleep? Anybody? Okay, were you in a tent or were you in an RV? So who tented? Who tent camped? Okay. The loudness, the cracking. Anybody get like freaked out because of all the noise? Okay, I do every time. Freak the fuck out. It's really, but I love it. I enjoy it. So feeling safe in your environment is important. Okay, so anybody else want to add to this? What do you think about, I love that you brought up tools. It would be kind of important in terms of physiological needs to have ways to hunt and forage. So those are tools, right? So being able to have a rifle to be able to hunt, or have whatever gear you need to fish, that would become something that kind of goes between these two. You don't need, let's just say, a fishing rod to survive, but the fishing rod is the tool in your environment that would provide that fish. So can you see how these can kind of get enmeshed with each other? They can. Again, environmental needs, clothing, freezing cold our outdoor environment. If you're not cold adapted, clothing would become a physiological need. Even though you don't need clothes physiologically, you would need clothes to protect your physiology from the elements. So this is the difference between physiological and environmental. Any questions about that? So in terms of healthcare, you break your leg. What are you gonna do? You can't walk, you can't work. That work limits your ability to make money. You can't pay for food, right? So can you see how, again, these two are very enmeshed with each other and it can get confusing? And also, why someone who would be devastated when their income goes away? Why would that be, right? Well, because that income, how we consume, getting our access to food is directly connected to our capitalistic environment. So it would make a lot of sense for in this system or whatever system you're in, that the way things are traded, that would be maybe projecting an extreme physiological need into the need for that item, such as money, right? Money buys you life. It also can buy you safety, right? Now, let's just say you don't have money. There's another way for you to buy these two items. Who wants to make a guess what that is? Say it out loud.
Stealing?
Well, yes, stealing, that is common, especially for people who are in total primal. I would steal, wouldn't you guys steal? If you had no access to food and shelter and water, and there was abundance around you, and your siblings are also starving, why wouldn't you steal? I would. It's a survival mechanism to steal, right? Even though it might promote something that is conflicting with this one, right? So the risks of choosing to do something like stealing, which might be seen as bad, here put you at risk for abandonment, rejection, and disapproval. You're close. What would get you access to this without money?
I was gonna say like connections with family members or like other people around you.
You mean this one?
And you can change goods or services.
Are you talking about change goods or services? Can you change what types of, are you talking about what food you need access to?
Maybe I have equipment and the other one has food and then you can change or.
Right, you're trading. Is that what you're saying? Trade. You both said the same thing. You're talking about this. And that's the correct answer. This is why this one is where it is located. If you have, and this is why having other people around you, if you have access to other people who might have access to these things, you're going to want to become related somehow. All of you have experienced this in some way. And it may not be for food and water, but the desire to be included. How many of you have experienced an inner desire between your first memory of life to this point? How many of you have had an inner desire for a group to want to like you? If you don't raise your hand, go schedule a session. Because that is evolved, normal, ingrained in every single human being here. If it wasn't, your family line would have died a long time ago. So the fact that you are all sitting here evolutionary wise means that this is predictably built in all of you. So that desire for inclusion is about resources. It is ingrained. We may not see it today because it's not so obvious about these two items, but ultimately, psychologically and primitively, the symbol of inclusion equates to a reduction in the risks of death. So, how many of you have been rejected, abandoned, disapproved of, seen as a disappointment? How many of you have heard your parents, I'm just disappointed in you? Right. Done something you're embarrassed about. That's why that was one of the first questions. What are you guys embarrassed about? What have you done? Because it has everything to do with this psychology around the connection primarily to inclusion, to life, to this physiological need. And then access to what you need for physiological needs. So living in that, we're talking thousands of years. So yeah, any questions about that? So if you have belonging, you feel worthy in your tribe, your community, that can very well reduce your stress for everything. All of it. Even if you are, let's just say, struggling financially, having community, that what that means is that you're safe enough in your community to ask for help and not feel that you are going to risk the community by admitting you need help, right? So asking for help for a lot of people can feel extremely vulnerable. And that what vulnerability means is the risk for being seen as bad. The risk for being seen as bad is directly attached to this third hierarchy of need. Why would you care if someone looks down on you for struggling? What would be the reason for caring about that? What do you guys think? Do you understand the question?
And you feel like other people won't see you as valuable to them because you're just taking stuff from them.
Well, yeah, and it could be associated to if you're struggling, maybe that's a signal that you're maybe a problem. There might be, right. That would be not necessarily a truth or a fact, but it could be a fear. That if you're seen as a problem, that might require more energy of the community. That might be a risk factor for exclusion, abandonment, rejection, or shunning into the wilderness, which is how we've primarily been wired for thousands of years, right? Did you guys understand that? Does anybody need clarification? Because this is ultimately when you think about the occurrence of anxiety, or in particular, we could use anxiety because anxiety is a manifestation of fear. What is it typically associated with? And let's say our community, in the college student community. What do you guys think anxiety is connected to? I mean, it's a lot of things, right? We've talked about it. How much of it is, how many of you would agree that it is connected to fear of failure in college? Fear of disapproval from parents, right? So how many of you connect anxiety to not meeting expectations, not being good enough? Okay, what do you think that's connected to? Anxiety about not being good enough. Good enough for what and for who? That has everything to do with this. Trying to prove your worthiness, even if it's not to a parent, it could be to yourself. So if you're trying to prove your worthiness to yourself, who's really the block in terms of fulfilling this? If you're trying to prove to yourself that you are worthy, who is determining then if you can secure this or not? Say it out loud. Yourself. So you're the one who's discriminating against yourself. Right? So an issue, and I'll keep on moving forward with the slides. For a lot of people is they say, I'm good if someone else struggles. They deserve grace, they deserve to be loved, and they deserve the help that they need. But I gotta get high grades. That is an indication that this is not secure for you. So don't be surprised you have those anxieties, because you're saying, I have to be superior to feel good about myself, to feel that I'm worthy of this. Everybody else can be who they are, but I have to be higher functioning. That's an indication that how do you feel about your innate self? That's an indication of how do you feel about your innate self? Do you feel good about it or do you feel bad about it? Do you know what innate means? Your true self, your realness. If you are expecting highness of yourself to feel like you're adequate, what is your default mode? You feel not good, correct? So high expectations of yourself and of others is an indication that this hierarchy of need is not secure, right? This is where this transition into esteem is a big block for a lot of people. They might only feel esteem if they're perfect, right? So if they're perfect with what? A societal standard, a community concept, right? So esteem, to really get into what this is, esteem, it would need to be including your suckiness, is the way I describe it. You need to be able to suck and still feel good about your innate self, right? Now, what I mean by suckiness is, can you struggle? Can you, I like to use this as an example because I feel like it's so obvious. Let's say we're all in a band and no one here has ever played a musical instrument. And we're all gonna learn to play a musical instrument today. How many of us are gonna be real good at it? Not one, right? Unless it's a real simple piece of equipment, but chances are it's not, even if we had a little, whatever those things are, even a drum. So expectations are like saying, I should be exceptional, but not giving yourself the time and the space to actually learn and develop the skill set, right? So to get to esteem, you have to believe that you are capable of learning. And that's what esteem is. I am capable, I can handle, right? The problem for people who attach esteem to accomplishment is they don't have esteem while they struggle to learn. They have low self-esteem because they innately believe that they suck. They assume that's a bad thing, and their esteem struggles, and they believe it's like chasing a mirage. My esteem will be better when I am exceptional. So between however you are today and that exceptionalism, you suck inside in your own mind. So people that tend to shift out of this detach esteem from their belonging. I am amazing. I belong because I'm trustworthy, I'm hardworking, or whatever it is that your society likes. And you feel that you're a high quality human, if there's a inner human essence, that gives you the grace to figure your shit out. Like you're not gonna be great college students probably till your junior year, unless you were advanced and were taught to be great students early, who knows? But it's going to come with practice. Someone with esteem can be struggling and be okay with that. It doesn't affect their sense of self in terms of belonging. Any questions about that? So I'm gonna go quickly around these other points because I want to go through my slides. So cognitive, once someone feels that they can teach and learn and they are okay with the struggle, their brain gets a lot more oxygen in that frontal cortex. Because now they become more open-minded. Once you come out of esteem, or once you're able to surrender like this need for an approval in your accomplishments, that it's no longer about proving yourself, and you get into this, I'm kind of a cool person, and it's not about competition. Competition's here. It's about the enjoyment of learning things. You now open your mind to infinite space of potential, because you're no longer kind of limited to social construct. Any questions? Please let me know if I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. So cognitive functioning, when you hit that cognitive level, this is when you get to academia, you get people who are expanding knowledge in different areas, in farming, in, it doesn't matter what it is, expanding knowledge. You're willing to gamble and figure it out. So think primitively, this would be like someone who's stuck in belonging will say, my worth is how much food I can bring back. Someone in esteem would say, you know, I think we should try hunt over here, regardless of how much food we bring back. Because let's find out if there's more pheasants in that area. There's a little bit more risk. You see that? Someone who's thinking my worth is based on how much food, they won't take that risk. And they're going to be competitive and always comparing themselves. Someone stuck in here is going to be comparing themselves to their competition and then defining if they're worth, you know, if they got enough food to bring back. Someone in esteem is going to be a little more curious and willing to not come home with the most food, right? Someone in cognitive is going to be studying the best ways, the different types of woods. They're going to be looking at the atmosphere and studying maybe a little bit more about, oh, I've noticed. They're going to be really focusing not on how much they produce, but environments around the whole picture. Does that make sense how the brain is functioning? And you see someone that might be stuck here with the same end goal is self-centered, self-gratifying. This one here is probably thinking more in terms of the group, and this one here is looking at the like curiosity of the whole picture as a whole. Going into aesthetic, this is commonly described as how people feel when they're on mushrooms, hallucinogens, that greens are greener, and you don't need them. Okay, this doesn't say mushroom aesthetic. But people who've lived at this level of consciousness, which there's been a lot, that enough so that it has been studied, it was studied a century ago, right? That the way they exist is in peace with the whole system. They're in awe of animals and the differences in animals. They're less likely to kill a spider and more likely to want to look at it and to recognize that it has inherent value. That yeah, the beauty in all things. So it becomes even more broad and more of an observer's position, right? So you can see the workload going up this is actually less, right? Workload is less once you get up into here. And self-actualization is when you recognize the whole thing. So I'm actually going to start, and transcendence is like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad. Those are the very rare human beings that have really impacted human behavior and thought patterns for thousands of years, right? So it's very rare. So moving forward, let's look. Okay, we already went through this. We already went through this. We went through this. And this. Any questions on esteem and competence? Okay. Cognitive needs, meaning, purpose, open-mindedness, curiosity, exploration, aesthetic needs. This is a little bit better. Art, music, expression. A lot of people think that aesthetic needs means that you're concerned about your looks. I want you to think about that. If someone is in that area of aesthetics, the level of aesthetic, what would be the point of caring about your looks? What do you guys think that's connected to? Let's have a little discussion about it.
Love and belonging, I think.
100%, yeah. Why would that be so connected to love and belonging? Why do you guys think the way you, caring about the way you look would be connected to that?
The better looking you are, the less likely you are to be outcast.
That would be the symbolism of it, right? It symbolizes security if you're perceived as Anybody else? Because I'm gonna add to that, but I wanna see if anybody else really think about what is body image, which is what we're talking about in terms of love and belonging, because that is an aesthetic, right? What is that? What is it really, what is the interpretation if we look at it from a survival standpoint?
I was just saying, you're looking for the satisfaction of others.
Yes, so who is determining your love and belonging then? Is it you? Or someone else? What?
As is someone else.
Someone else. Yeah, I want you guys to take a moment and think about that. If someone else is controlling, is determining if you're worthy of love and belonging, can you ever secure it? Is it possible to secure that hierarchy of need if someone else determines your worth, especially based on body image? Maybe temporarily, maybe temporarily, right? Because if you're not determining it, then psychologically, you're gonna constantly need other people to approve of your looks. Because if your looks, let's just say culturally, the body image looks change in order, so what then happens to your sense of love and belonging? If it changes, can you see how that might make you feel vulnerable then to love and belonging? You guys, anybody you're confused? Please don't hesitate if you are, because this can be hard to understand. So in aesthetics, so in that aesthetic area, it is unconditional. It is seeing the beauty in all things as they are. So I want to go back to body image and go into a little bit more detail, and we're going to have more of this conversation when we get into body image specifically. But quickly, body image is about blending into your background. It's about fitting in. How many other animals want to blend into the environment? Oh yeah, a lot of animals do not want to be seen. So it can play this part as well, not just standing out as superior, right? Look at me, I'm the superior of the look, which can be seen as a value. But just wanting to blend in is a big part of our psychological wiring, and that has to do with the safety in your community. Someone can be in aesthetic needs and have that openness and still have the impulse to want to blend into whatever culture they're in, right? How many of you have traveled the world, been around? When you go to a new place, do you feel like you stick out? Right? Your clothing, how your hair is done, even once you say something, right? It feels like they know I'm not from here. Doesn't feel very good. That is evolutionary psychology. You don't want to stick out. You just want to be peacefully kind of blending in. And so it's nature to be like, I need to buy all new clothes. I need, if you have the privilege of that, to be able to say, how can I blend in? How can I wear those shoes? And what does the mind look at? This is an important thing for you to be aware of and to actually recognize in yourself. If you care, if you don't care, that's amazing, right? But if you care, why is it that you would want to look at the environment and literally soak it into your unconscious psyche? It is because of that, right? What are people wearing? What are their shoes? How do they do their hair? What type of makeup? How do they do their makeup? How are they talking? Their dialect. Your dialect can change. Going from different areas of this country where there's so many different dialects, you will change your dialect and you won't even notice, so that you don't seem so outrageous. Or the contrast between the culture you're in won't be there. And when I lived in Alabama shortly, it was, I got called out all the time. You're not from around here. You're a Yankee? Like, I'm like, no, Indians, Cowboys, West, right? Terrible, terrible association, but the West. And how that just cultural assumptions about you can be a danger, right? someone looks at you and thinks you're not from around here could be a negative thing. So wanting to just blend in can be a survival mechanism. Aesthetic is different. So seeing beauty in nature, love and respect for all living things, recognizing that they are important in the whole picture. This is where the idea that humans are superior to all other species starts to sound hilarious, even though we have this frontal cortex, which makes us unique. So self-actualization, and then we're going to move on. This is realizing one's full potential. Often seen in those people that are real game changers. Again, we're now going into areas Maslow studied, where he studied the most exceptional beings, humans that made the biggest impact. So we're talking Einstein, we're talking Eleanor Roosevelt, and you can look through history and recognize, oh, this person had to have been self-actualized, not only by the way they're talking, but the fact that they had such brain power to do what they're doing. Goal achievement without pride and ego. So they're not concerned about the achievement itself. Their concern is the understanding of whatever it is that might make an impact. There's a lot more, someone who is self-actualized is far more concerned about this whole of humanity than they are their tiny little culture, right? They're beyond that. Doesn't mean they don't have a culture or community that they sustain and that they're willing to be in, just means that they don't see that theirs is superior anymore. They just see as a collective human consciousness. Pride, I want to really quickly go into pride. Pride would be like, I am superior to you, and I'm going to prove it to you. And even if I'm not that good, I'm going to continue to war and fight over my excellence, even if it hurts everybody, right? Pride is very inflated, meaning you think you're better than you actually are. And we're going to, again, I'll go into more detail about that in a later chapter. So they don't care anymore about how they're perceived. They're more concerned about the essence of the process, and it's not about them or their identity. Typically, these people are huge contributors to the community, and they do it for the whole rather than the self. They don't identify who they are by this, and they are concerned for the suffering of others because they care about the whole system. Aware of reality and can discern falsehood. People who are in self-actualization have a very clear sense of people who are not in that space. And they have a lot of compassion for it, right? So they can tell when someone's in pride and recognize that that person is probably suffering, and they don't have to compete, right? Someone who is, so yeah, they have this incredible discernment of falsehood and lying, and because they can tell there's context around why would someone lie, right? Because they need to be seen as valuable. They're afraid of abandonment and rejection, right? So someone who comes out of that belonging can discern people who are in and insecure of that because they've lived it and come out of it. Okay, that's another view of it. So let's quickly go through transcendence. There's a whole nother chapter on this alone, but this refers to the highest and most inclusive holistic levels of human consciousness, behaving and relating as ends rather than means to oneself, to significant others, to human beings, in general, to other species, to nature and the cosmos. Yeah, I mean, it's just, how do you function? Okay, I want to go into, because we're gonna go into this in another time, but these are someone in transcendence are these people that are just beyond normal, and they typically, you don't hear about them because they aren't trying to sell themselves. A lot of people who are have a lot of altruism, and they devote themselves to peace. So Mother Teresa, you know, you can look through history and go, wow, these people were so devoted to the whole without really wanting and caring about, again, securing their own survival. Okay. I am not gonna go into this now, so if you guys want. To go to, let's say, let's go to discussions, we'll do class 4 now. Any questions about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Nothing? Okay. So, let's go to, let's get into survival mode and fight or flight. I really tried really hard with my pictures. So I feel very proud of them. So what is survival mode? Basically, well, how many of you have heard of fight or flight? Who wants to describe it? Anybody? Did you raise? You always answer. I have to let everybody else. No one else. Anybody? Fight or flight? Go ahead.
When your body decides there's danger, so you need to,
Your body decides that?
or do they,
Okay.
and you need to. Find a way to get away from that danger or prevent that danger, so fight it or run from it or fight it.
Right. So the perception, I'm gonna add some detail to that. Anybody else want to add to that before I do? How many of you have felt fight or flight? Yeah. What's it feel like? What does it feel like?
Roller coaster.
Describe it.
When you're going down on the roller coaster, your heart drops, and then when you're coming back up, you're like, wasn't that bad, and then it happens again.
Right. For me, it would be before I get on the roller coaster, I'd be freaking the fuck out. I have a fear of height. I always believe I'm gonna fall. Right. Heart rate skyrockets. Yeah.
Your digestive system stops,
Mhm.
goes down. Shortness of breath.
Your body's preparing to literally physically run or fight. And all of those physiological adaptations are priming your body to do something, right? Psychologically, what does it feel like? What does fight or flight feel like psychologically? I mean, I can tell you, but I know you've experienced it. I want you to actually think about it. Those of you who have very clear recollection of what it feels like. Anybody wanna?
It feels like the end of the world.
Yes, it does. Catastrophic. Anybody want to add to that? It feels like the end of the world?
I felt nothing at all, like literally just nothing, like no emotion, just apathy.
That's almost, that's interesting. You went right in. There was no processing in between. That might have to do with the context for what you were doing. Do you want to share or no?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think I wrote about this in my example for the homework a few days ago too. But when I was 15, I was walking home in the dark from a basketball court, and then I heard aggressive barking, and there was this huge dog like about 50 feet to my right. And I didn't think, I just freaking sprinted for the gate. I ended up being in there and shutting the gate with like less than a half second to spare.
So was this dog just out?
Yeah, from what I saw, it had a color,
Yeah,
but I saw no owner, nothing.
right.
So,
And your assumption was it was gonna chomp at your legs.
yeah, and it definitely looked like it was going.
It was
like,
going-
mad when, like.
So it was defending territory then.
Yeah, but this was at a school. I don't know what it was doing there, but yeah.
Right. It's kind of amazing, right? So if you had a direct reason in your mind, so it does go faster. How many of you have experienced fight or flight with something that you weren't sure was real or not?
This is something I just don't know, like usually when someone like hides behind me or scared you, like your first like reaction to it, like mine was like
Right,
so I'm like, I don't feel anything, I just like, that's okay, it's not.
right, so bracing, you're bracing. Yeah. Anybody else want to go into the feeling of cataclysm or something catastrophic? Escaping, right? Get out. That's a very fast and easy message, is go, right? I would describe my experience of fight or flight as terror. Terror. Especially when it comes to something that is obscure, where the mind can go. Obscure means it's not obvious, but you're perceiving a real threat, survival, right? Whatever the symbolism is, and it's not obvious, but you know it's there. And in that case, if it is obscure, the mind will go to worst case scenario, because that is a protective mechanism, right? So if you don't know what it is would it be safe then to go with the least, the easiest thing that it could be? In terms of evolutionary survival, right? If there is something that's threatening, and you're not quite sure what it is, would it make more sense to go to the worst case scenario of what it is, or the most safe sense of what it is?
Yeah, it's really worse because anything below that and that's not.
Correct. Did you guys hear that? Your brain's, it's more safe to go to the worst case scenario. Now, if you go to the worst case scenario, what does that do to those fight or flight mechanisms? The biology, the central nervous system that stimulates cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Heart rate gets more intense. Difficult breathing. Sweating. It really becomes like a tunnel vision, and it's not like literally necessarily tunnel, but it's your eyes have a hard time focusing on one thing, and the other thing is auditory and light become really intense, which doesn't help the freaking situation, right? So again, there's a perceived threat that's obscure. The mind naturally goes to worst case scenario. Everything starts to spin. And what is happening in your thoughts? What happens cognitively in fight or flight? Again, spectrum of threat, right? Worst case scenario, probably the largest reaction. What happens to your thoughts? What do you think?
I think everything always shuts down except for the constant like the threat of everything else you just off.
You mean you're thinking?
Yes.
Anybody else? To some degree, yes, but the thoughts would be go, escape, do something. It's really a very loud do something, do something, do something, do something, and it becomes really intense. How many of you have experienced that? Do something, do something, do something, and then you're like an asshole and you're doing weird things, or your behavior in social situations can be like bizarre, right? Or you won't go out because you know that is going to be triggered, right? But you're not quite sure why, because it might be obscured from you, okay? So, a physiological adaptation in the body that occurs in response to perceived threat. You have to perceive it. This is hard because that response doesn't just go. It doesn't just go. That's just not how it works. You have to have a perception of threat. Again, it might be something you believe in, right? So for me, I'll give you my example. I believed, and you can, obviously I'm skipping a ton of context for why I believed this, but I believed that my worth as a woman in society was how lean I was. That if I could be lean, that would make me feel like I could belong, right? So if I perceived body fat Or that, not even that, if I perceived that I had eaten something that would promote fat gain, I had a full-on fight or flight attack. What do you think I did? Is the brain goes, do something, do something, do something. I'd go exercise. I'd go puke the food up. It'd be in the middle of the night, 11 o'clock. I'd go run from my apartment over here, that's now the lacrosse field, and I would run down Broadway, downtown, see the parties, run back, and then I would perceive that the threat of body fat from my survival and belonging was reduced. So then the symptoms went away. Right? So there was context for why that was happening, but I didn't know that. I never would have questioned that fight or flight at the time was linked to my beliefs. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I'm having panic attacks, right? It's really obscure when the threat is attached to belonging. That's obscure. And it goes that broad and that intense. Because if you get ousted, shunned, if you're seen as not a valuable community member, that ultimately to your primal wiring threatens your access to shelter, food, belonging, just camaraderie or just feelings of inclusion that are so important to our mental health. So it requires a perceived threat. And the feeling is stress and agitation. So sources of stress. Threat to one's access to food, water, sleep, care, self-defense, job security, belonging, intimacy, family, friends, community, and freedom to explore one's life. Anything that is going to take away from those primary foundational hierarchies of need are going to trigger a fight or flight response. And biologically, I want to ask this question. Biologically, is the perceived threat from someone judging you any different than the threat of food going away? Biologically, how the central nervous system responds, is it different? What's the answer? Does anybody have a different thought? Biologically, does the central nervous system that stimulates fight or flight respond differently to the threat of being judged or the threat of you're going to starve to death? You say no. What does anybody else say? I know you guys have an opinion. Who agrees with that? That no, there is no difference. Right. Because there is none. The central nervous system does the same thing. There is no two central nervous systems. It might be different in the degree, right? The spectrum, like how, if you think of it like a volume control, is the volume turned really high or is it turned really far down? How intense is that stimulus to that system, right? What do you guys think determines the volume control? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Any of you confused? What determines the volume control on perceived threat? The intensity that your fight or flight responds. We've already done all this. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So,
Say it again.
yourself.
What part of yourself? Well, the brain for sure, but there is perceptions, right? What does it require? This is another reason why it's obscure to many people why they have anxiety. Because it's not an obvious bear running at you, especially someone who has extreme anxiety. There's no obvious like threat to your survival, but you're feeling like that. It's, again, for me, it was terror. It was incredible amounts of terror. So research by Dr. DeLu, who is the leading research on the amygdala of the brain, has written multiple books and studying the fight or flight response. And he is really fascinating. He's been studying fight or flight for 30 years, but previous to him, fight or flight was studied for over a century. Pavlov and the dogs. Human physiology was founded on fight or flight physiology. Dr. DeLu believes that the amygdala will not start until there is a sense of inability for a human in particular compared to the threat. So it takes two assessments. An assessment of one's own capacity compared to whatever it is. Again, it requires for you to trigger that response, generally speaking, especially with obscure current modern day first world anxiety, right? Fight or flight, perceived sense of self and an assumption of one's capacity compared to a threat, whatever it is. You have to believe I can't handle this for anything to get triggered. I cannot handle the terror of falling from a building. No, not for me. But I could handle a snake bite. I don't give a shit. How many of you don't want a snake bite? Right. How many of you don't care about a snake bite? Right. Sense of what I can handle. I don't know why. I don't care why. For whatever reason, I think they're cool. But I walk up to a ledge and I literally am like those videos of the people that are like on their hands and knees crawling through those see-through floors that I can't, no, not for me. And honestly, I think about falling and I don't need to go there, but yeah, falling and knowing you're gonna die and your body's gonna slide, I don't like it. Okay, self-evaluation. Number one, a self-evaluation of what you can handle and comparison. So self-evaluation for many people. So let's use social context. Can you handle being seen as unworthy? That you're in a group and people think that you suck. So for me, I'm going through this master's PhD program. And part of me is like, please like me. Right? But part of me is also saying, if I'm not good enough for this, I want to know. Like, what if I'm not at the level that this requires? Right? So part of me is like a little nervous little kid, and part of me feels like I can totally handle rejection because I'd rather know and move on with what I want to do with my life, right? So can you see how that might change my biological reaction to not being seen as valuable to my cohort, to my supervisors, to the professors, that I'm going to do the best I can. And at the same time, if it's not good enough, it's not good enough. I'm doing the best, and they're the ones who know what I ought to be able to do, right? So self-evaluation, comparison. In terms of love and belonging, social comparison. How do I fit in? If you're using that to get a sense of worth. If you don't fit in and you don't have a sense of worth, you're going to trigger fight or flight to some degree. Did that make sense? If it doesn't, again, this is all getting recorded. And I post them on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, but so a lot of this has to do with assumption, right? Because I know, for example, if I'm camping and there is a grizzly bear, would a child know a grizzly bear is dangerous? Probably not. But we've learned, we've heard, read stories. There's warning signs. You go up towards Montana, there's boxes for you to put all your shit in because they will get into your car. There's different seasons where bears are more dangerous, right? Maybe you need to pack some, pack some heat or pack some spray, whatever you need to do. And this is where, if I don't feel secure with the bear, having bear spray or a gun removes that, because I have that tool to reduce the fight or flight response. It does not mean when I see a bear that I don't freak the fuck out and my whole hair stands up and my chest isn't, but if I have a tool, I'm probably not gonna have the same central nervous system response to someone who doesn't have a tool. Am I confusing you? So my sense of capacity changed. The bear did not change. The threat did not change. So what does it take to trigger anxiety, fight, flight, stress to some degree? And the degree is pretty large. It requires a self-assessment and a comparison to the threat. Okay? So for me, stress has to do with like my children's safety. And that is everything to do with the fact that I don't know if I can handle the loss of a child. Right? Like that would ruin me. So I have a lot more stress when it comes to my children. I have a lot of stress when it comes to my pets because that's painful. Right? Do I have any stress at this point to die? Probably not. I'm pretty sure I've already kind of tried it. And I'm not afraid to die, but when it comes to my children, I'm all sorts of a wreck. Right? I honestly don't know how I would handle that. So it is a source of vulnerability for me. So getting help is a great example of kind of how to look at this. Why is it that a tool like self-defense or having help, having connection to other people might feel like you are that the safety comes from an outside source? So this can get really confusing, and I'm going to try to be very not confusing. Because if you feel that you are incapable, that inner sense of inability, and you find a tool that gives you a sense of ability, you're going to go get that tool. So for example, if in a social situation, you're feeling insecure, you're feeling like you don't have anything, you're not cool, you're not whatever, but smoking pot with another group of friends gives you that sense, you're going to light up because that takes that away. And it may be also the medicinal properties of the ganja, right? Social pressure, that's social comparison, right? There's other ways to do it. That's just a real common way for people to feel connection. I'm insecure, but if I do this, I have a sense of community, right? So if you were to quit, let's say vaping, I feel like I can connect with people when I vape. I feel like there's camaraderie, that they're safe with me. I'm not judging them. There's a lot that goes into that. And you think, okay, that's going to take away some of my insecurity because that's an easy, definable thing that I can connect on with others. That is going to reduce your fight or flight response on top of the nicotine. However, what they found is you take away the nicotine and you're still going to have the issue of social insecurity. Is it the nicotine? Or is it the social insecurity that's the problem? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? So think about it. Fight or flight requires an inner self-assessment that you cannot handle whatever it is. I don't want social rejection. I don't want to feel awkward. It would be really easy for me to connect by wearing the social outfit, the clothing, right? To fit in, whatever those things are, to fit in, to use the language, right? To bond or connect with something that might be superficial, but that might allow you the space to connect, right? So ultimately the goal would be, let's just say in that situation, you're tired of vaping, you're trying to quit, you can't, is to not worry about the vaping so much, is ask, okay, how am I socially in that situation? Because it's not always the same for everybody for why they vape, but in this situation that I'm describing, how would I bond with people or connect with people I don't know? If I'm not going to use that to define our relationship, to start at least. Because sometimes you can start relationships with those kind of passing the peace pipe, like those things together that you can do, right? How can we connect and bond without those so that you don't connect a reduction in your fight or flight to the substance that you're now going to have to use because you're using it connected to feeling better? I don't even know what my question was. It was just a statement question. Okay, anybody have any questions about this conversation or want to add to it? I know this was kind of lecture-y, you know. So, yeah, central nervous system, it doesn't change. It's always got the same enzymes. It's evolutionary wise, the same as it's been for thousands of years. It either is turned up or turned down to some volume. And yeah, we'll start here next week. No questions. Nothing. Okay. I'm not gonna see you for a week. Monday's a holiday. Yeah, Labor Day. I know, I'm gonna miss you too.
Ready to go? Wash it.
Are you doing?